Here, Chris.
I mean, Vince, I love the fact that we're having this conversation. I love the fact that here we are at this stage of everything that's going on, everything we've lived through for the last year, a little more than a year. And here we are, we're talking about vaccinations. That alone is remarkable, that we are here in May of 2021 talking about vaccines. And I'm really optimistic. I'm hopeful that we can sort of share some of that optimism and some of those ideas with our audience, because there's lots of questions out there. So hopefully we can answer a lot of those questions for everybody out there.
God, it's been a long year. You're right, Chris. So we're here tonight to answer your questions and hopefully about the vaccine and the final stages of this pandemic. Those questions really boil down to one thing: when will our state be safe? Tonight's panel discussion will zero in on our ability as a state to reach herd immunity, which experts tell us arrives when 70% of us are vaccinated. We'll be exploring issues ranging from the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines, vaccine availability for children, and the cultural barriers that are impacting the transition to our new normal. Hey, we encourage all of you viewers to type in and submit questions live during the conversation via the Q&A function right at the bottom of your screen. We've also solicited questions in advance via the Denver Gazette and Channel 9 websites, and we'll be asking our panelists some of those questions as we go as well. As our moderator, Chris Vanderveen will be sifting through and asking those questions tonight. And answering those questions are some of the best health experts in the state. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce those panelists, and then Chris will take us right into the conversation. First off is Dr. Emily Bates, Professor of Pediatrics at CU School of Medicine. Dr. Bates earned her PhD from Harvard Medical School and has taught cell and molecular biology and biochemistry and worked with RNA, the key ingredient of these vaccines, for decades. She has done numerous presentations answering questions about the vaccines and can speak to issues about fertility, children, the side effects of the vaccines, and reasons people don't want to get vaccinated. Dr. Ross Kettle is Professor of Immunology and Microbiology at the CU School of Medicine. He was one of the participants in phase 3 trials for the Moderna vaccine. So he's actually been vaccinated for over 9 months now. He can answer your questions about vaccine development and vaccine safety and vaccine effectiveness. Dr. Lisa Miller is Professor of Epidemiology at the Colorado School of Public Health, where she also serves as Director of the Preventive Medicine Residency Program and is the Associate Dean for Public Health. Before that, she was the state epidemiologist, which means she was the state's chief kind of disease detective, figuring out how to control and stop diseases. She can speak to health policy issues and what other states and countries are doing with vaccines. Finally, Dr. Kweku Hazel is a surgical fellow at CU Anschutz and works with African American and Latino communities on vaccine distribution and vaccine equity. Dr. Hazel is a member of the Colorado Vaccine Equity Task Force and serves on the Community Outreach and Policy Committee. He can answer questions about access to vaccines in different communities and cultures throughout our state. So that is our esteemed panel. Thank you for being here. So Chris, over to you, and let's get started.
So much. This is going to be a bit of a freewheeling conversation, and I think that's okay. I'm going to direct some of my questions at some of the doctors in particular. Here's the great thing for me. I'm just the journalist. I get to just ask questions and ask some pretty complicated questions, but these are really smart people, and they've done a lot of work studying a lot of these subjects. But I also want to encourage the doctors, if there's something you want to say, if there's something we're not getting at, feel free. Feel free to join in the conversation. And let's, like I said, let's just have a good conversation. I think that the goal of tonight, there's been a lot of talk about shaming and sort of shaming people into sort of getting the vaccine. I don't think any of us is interested in that today. I love the idea of arming people with information they can use in their own lives and their families' lives to make good decisions for themselves. Dr. Bates, I'm going to start off with you because I'm going to start off with a short question, but it's a fascinating question in the time that we're in, because I think we sort of take this for granted. My question is simple. What is a vaccine? When I ask you, a person who's very knowledgeable about this, when I ask you, what's a vaccine? What do you say?
So I like to think about it as if we're in a war with coronavirus. And when coronavirus infects a person, it multiplies and makes millions more of itself. And our immune system is our defense. But no matter how strong your immune system is, it doesn't have the tools to dismantle or destroy a virus unless it has a warning sign. Now, a vaccine is a warning sign of what a decoration on a coat of a virus looks like, so that your immune system can build a defense before it even sees the virus. So your vaccine-trained immune system prevents the infection and destroys the virus. It's really, a vaccine is the most natural remedy in the world because it's really your immune system.
So what's the difference between I'm assuming the doctors on this panel are vaccinated. Truth be told, I'm fully vaccinated. I was got full immunity, or at least, full vaccination about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks after my second vaccination with the Moderna shot. I got the Moderna mRNA vaccine. What's the difference between sort of the Moderna mRNA vaccine and, let's say, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
You want me to take that?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are both mRNA vaccines. And mRNA is different from our genes. Our genes are made of DNA, and they're chemically different. The mRNA is like the instructions to make that decoration on a coat of a virus, called the spike protein. The mRNA degrades or breaks down really quickly. So it's not in our system for very long, but our immune system has a memory of what that looks like. And so it builds antibodies that will then prevent infection from coronavirus. Now, the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines are more traditional vaccines, and they're DNA based, but they're also the instructions for making that spike protein or decoration on the outside of a virus coat. So they give the same type of instructions, but the mechanism that it gets into us is different.
Kendall, I want to ask you about, you've had this vaccine with you for a while. Walk me through a little bit of your backstory. And what's interesting to me is not only have you had this vaccine, you were vaccinated a long time ago in a trial, but you're still measuring how effective this vaccine is with you. Tell me what you're finding out.
Yeah. So shortly after the pandemic hit, a number of us got back into the lab and started putting together a test to follow immunity against the virus, specifically initially just for those who had COVID, and to find out who in the background of people. We actually initially speculated we'd all been traveling a lot, and we thought, gee, I wonder how many of us actually had it, and we had no idea. We had crazy speculations that a third of us were already immune. It turned out that was wildly wrong. But it ended up being very useful in surveying the community. And then it turned out to be very useful to monitor my own immunity after I got the vaccine. I signed up for the clinical trial simply because I'm a vaccinologist. This is a rare opportunity in a career to actually be part of a vaccine trial. And you never know if you're going to be a placebo or the vaccinee, but I have a certain set of skills. So I followed myself as I went along. I understood. I could see my immune response rising at about 10 days after I got the vaccine. I was just completely blown away at the strength of these vaccines in terms of the immune response they generate. I've been following immunity for 25 years now. And these are really, as all the data is showing, these are some of the best vaccines that have been made, certainly in recent history, but frankly, in all of vaccine history. And so it's been really exciting to follow it along in myself. I'm about 9 months out now, and I can attest to the fact that my immune memory is still very robust. It's very strong. And that's really exciting to be able to see and then be able to tell people my personal experience with it.
Good sign, right? I mean, that's a good sign that here we are 9 months out and you still have strong levels of protection. I mean, it might be a different story if you didn't, but that probably tells somebody like me who just got my second dose that, this is probably pretty good for a little while.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think there were a lot of rumors early on that maybe the immunity against this could wane very quickly, unusually quickly. That was the fear early on, particularly the fear that immunity post-COVID, that once you've had the infection itself, maybe your immunity could fall apart pretty quickly. Immunity always wanes after you recover from infection. There's nothing new about that. And post-vaccine immunity is a different thing than post-infection immunity anyways. So there wasn't, frankly, really great, in my view, not really great data around that fear that immunity would wane super quickly. And all of the data that's coming through is essentially confirming, yeah, that a lot of that was a lot of noise. Immunity is staying strong and robust through a very long period of time. And we're even finding out that the immunity against these variant viruses that are out there, the vaccines that we have are delivering really strong seemingly protective immunity even against those. So so far, all the data is really good for the vaccines.
And that's super important. A state like Colorado, where the Colorado Department of Health has said, if you get COVID now, there's a good chance that there's more than 50-50 chance that the variant, you're going to get the variant, and that's going to be an issue, for you. Right. So it's just something to keep in mind. Dr. Miller, I want to ask you a question in terms of, from a public health perspective. There is a lot of idea of where do we go now? So we're at that point. We're sort of I sort of view it as a pivotal point where there are some people, everybody who wanted to get a vaccine right away has generally gotten it. And we have a certain percentage of the population that may just decide, I'm never going to get it. Where do you think we are in terms of the vaccination plan? What more needs to be done? And give me your best elevator pitch as to why you believe that vaccination for people who are on the fence is a good idea.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the elevator pitch because I think it's really short. Vaccination is our way out of this. It's our way out of this pandemic. And as Dr. Kettle just mentioned, we have great vaccines, really amazing vaccines. I think probably better vaccines than any of us here on this panel expected. At least that's true for me. So that's my elevator pitch. What I think we still have to do, we've done the easy part of vaccination, which was this mass campaign. It was getting all those people who could hardly wait. If you remember, and I'm sure you all do remember, in the news field, that was the news story, that people couldn't get vaccines. And now we're talking about something different. We still have an access problem. There are people for whom those first mass vaccine opportunities weren't easy. Those people who were working multiple jobs or didn't have a car or had questions and didn't know where to get them answered or couldn't use their computer. I think we still have an access issue. And so we have to make it super easy. And we're starting to do that, making vaccine more available in pharmacies, in doctors' offices, making it available for adolescents when they go see their doctor. So it's the access issue that I think we can make real progress on. And then there's, I think, a slower process of talking to people who have questions. And I think it's really important that they hear from their own physicians and they get that recommendation. That's been shown with children's vaccines to really help move the needle as far as vaccination. So when you get your own healthcare provider or someone you trust to recommend the vaccine, I think that will help us too. It's a slower and more individualistic process.
I'm going to pause this for just a second because I'm going to have a request of Vince. And this is just a small request, Vince. If you could, I know we got a lot of questions beforehand, and I don't have those questions in front of me. So if you could feed me some of those questions that I know we got earlier and just send it through the chat, be super appreciative of that. Dr. Hazel, I want to ask you a question about this idea that there's going to be some people who are on the fence. And there's going to be some people, for a variety of reasons, may not trust the system. They may have reasons to not trust the system. What do you tell those folks who are sort of say, you know what, I don't know. I want to wait this. I want to hold this. I want to hold out. This isn't for me. They see that cases are going down around the country, and they maybe they lose the incentive to sort of get it. What do you tell them?
Yeah.
That's a great question, Chris.
Okay, now I'm getting here.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. And just the first thing I tell people who are on the fence or
he's talking, but I don't have any audio.
Apathetic
yeah,
toward
I'm hearing it.
Hold on one second. I want to make sure that we clear the air, because I want to make sure that there's somebody's mic who's still open, and I want to make sure that we all hear from Dr. Hazel. So please do me a favor and check that you're muted. And if you're talking, make sure you mute yourself, because we want to make sure we hear Dr. Hazel. So go ahead, Dr. Hazel. Hopefully we cleared that up, and we're all, it's 2021. Here we are getting used to sort of like Zoom calls. Make sure you muted yourself. And Dr. Hazel, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So essentially, when I hear these kind of issues with either hesitancy or just apathy, maybe not really thinking I need it since everybody else is getting it and maybe I wouldn't have to get it, or they just don't trust the system, or whatever the reason might be for not wanting the vaccine. The first thing I think about is one, can I listen to them? Can I hear what their exact concerns are? Because everyone's concerns are different. And so first thing is to listen. And the next thing is to provide them with the most accurate information that is available to enable them to make the most informed decision for themselves and their family. I do go ahead and talk to people and let them know that the reasons we are taking these vaccines are twofold, not just for yourself, but also for the community. And so anytime you're making the decision of whether or not to take the vaccine, or whether it's important, or whether you don't trust the system, the first thing to think of is this is not just for yourself, but for the people around you, your loved ones, the community. So that's one of the things we talk about. And the second of all, we provide information concerning the safety and then the effectiveness of the vaccine that people are able to understand very clearly. And I feel like that really helps people make the most informed decision, which usually is to take the vaccine.
I'm gonna throw this question out to the panel, and whoever wants to bite, go ahead. We're in an era where there's lots of skepticism of all sorts of things. I think we in the press feel that acutely. I think public health and healthcare has really felt that in particular pretty acutely over the last year. There's just a lot of people questioning, and I tend to believe that questioning is a good thing. But there's this idea that, look, we came up with this vaccine fairly quickly, much quicker than I think a lot of people thought. We were thinking we'd have mass vaccinations in June, and here we are in May, and we're sort of like scrambling to try to encourage people to get vaccinated. How do you get over that fear? I feel confident enough in what you guys do and what you guys tell me, but you guys are a heck of a lot smarter than I am. What do you tell people that sort of say, look, this thing was brought about really fast. We're putting it in our body. Technically, it's not. It's authorized by the FDA, but it's not approved by the FDA. So why am I going to do that to myself? Why am I going to vaccinate myself at a time when, this is a new vaccine?
Emily, you want to start on that? I've got some thoughts, but why don't you start?
So I think it's important. What you're saying is important. It's important to listen with empathy, because it is hard for people to know who to trust. There's rumors going around the internet from people who say they're doctors, and who do you trust, right? I think the way that I like to talk to people is by sharing my own experience and my own knowledge of how RNA works and what I do with RNA in the lab, and that it is really unstable. Like, it's hard for it to stay around for very long. And so it's going to just be there for a little bit of time, and it's going to teach our immune system, and our immune system has a really good memory. The other thing that's important to know is that these vaccine methods had been developed long before this pandemic hit. And they started clinical trials for other diseases like the flu, HIV, even cancer. But those clinical trials take a lot longer because we're not in a pandemic of any of those right now. And so we know that these are safe. We know how long RNA stays in our body. I've worked with RNA for decades. I've injected it into chickens and into worms. And so I know how long it's going to last, and that it's not going to hurt us.
Yeah, this is a question that comes up often, is the speed. How is it possible something that happened this quickly? As we noted earlier, we're a year into this whole thing. Before we hit a year of discovery of what this infectious agent was, we already had a couple of vaccines on board. That is absolutely a world record. And it's often compared to the mumps vaccine, which is the second fastest vaccine ever made, which was 4 years. But that was in the late 1960s. We do a lot of things faster than we did in the 1960s, right? And this is the nature of science. Not only does it build upon itself, but it allows us to do better things even faster. And so, as Emily said, there's a lot of data on these particular new platforms of vaccines, a good 10 years. So this isn't completely new. It's the public could hopefully take some comfort from the fact that these have been used for a long time, that a lot is understood about them. And all the vaccines are using the newer ones are using a slightly novel way of essentially biohacking their way to convince the body that it's a virus it's encountering and not something inert, right? So that's the trick behind vaccines, is to try and trick the immune system into thinking it's seeing a virus, but it's actually seeing something that couldn't possibly harm you in the way that a virus could. And they're really brilliantly conceived and brilliantly executed. There's a variety of reasons why they hit the market so much quicker, and that has a lot to do with manufacturing and when you start that, and a lot of that was preempted by the warp speed process, which really was a very effective program, it turns out, to really make sure that these vaccines hit the ground running as soon as they were available. Typically, you don't wait. Typically, you wait to see if a vaccine works before you begin manufacturing it, for obvious reasons. Why would you bother manufacturing something if you weren't sure it was working? And in this case, they preempted that, got it up and running so that it was ready to go as soon as it was approved. So, and this idea that it's a temporary approval or a non-approval, that's mostly a paperwork question and a bureaucratic question. It's not one in which they've taken any safety shortcuts whatsoever. So it's a very important point that people are worried that safety shortcuts have been taken. That's not the difference between an approved vaccine and an EUA.
Dr. Bates, I want to go back to you, because I'm going to combine a couple of questions that we've gotten from the audience, and I think this is in your wheelhouse. I know it's in your wheelhouse. One, are there risks we're sort of in that new stage where the Pfizer news today with 12 and 15-year-olds, not today, but this week, and now hospital systems are making that available for 12 to 15-year-olds. I suspect I have an 11-year-old daughter, so I'm at the bottom waiting for that authorization for her. But I wonder, one, and then I also want to talk about pregnancy, because there's lots of questions. Women who are pregnant, they may have very valid questions about, what is this doing? Are there risks for me? Are there risks for my baby? So it's twofold, but I do want to ask you, let's talk about children and safety for children. Let's also talk about safety for women who are pregnant.
Okay. Starting with the children, those clinical trials were just released, and the information data from those clinical trials were just released, and the data looks just beautiful. The Pfizer vaccine was shown to be completely safe and effective for 12-year-olds to 15-year-olds, and there were 1,131 children from the ages of 12 to 15 who received the placebo or who received the vaccine, and about an equal number that got a placebo. There were 16 COVID cases in the people who did not get the vaccine, but there were 0 cases of COVID-19 in the people who did get the vaccine, showing 100% effectiveness. Now, side effects were very similar to those that occur with people who are 16 and older. It's normal to get a headache or a soreness at the site of injection, and that's because that's your immune system building a response. So those are very good signs that the vaccine is working. Actually, adverse effects that happened happened equally between the placebo and the people who got the vaccine. So completely safe, very effective, even more effective than it is in older adults. So get vaccinated as soon as you can for your children, or let your children get vaccinated as soon as possible. Now, for women who are pregnant, this is the thing to keep in mind here is that pregnant women are more vulnerable to severe COVID-19. If a woman is pregnant, it's more likely that she's going to have to go to receive treatment in the hospital and be put on a ventilator than it would be if she was not pregnant and got COVID-19. So given that that's the case, it's very important to get protection from a COVID-19 infection. At the same time, pregnancy is a really sensitive time. Even before the pandemic occurred, I know from my own pregnancies that and miscarriages that we try and find a reason why a miscarriage occurred, right? And so so when these vaccines, so now at this point, over 35,000 women in the United States have gotten the vaccine while pregnant. And miscarriages and other adverse effects did not happen any more frequently in the people who got the vaccines than they happened pre-pandemic. So there is no reason to think that the vaccines are unsafe for someone who is pregnant or unsafe for the baby that we're carrying.
I notice we're getting some comments, and I'll address this fairly quickly, and then we'll sort of move on. We're getting some comments about, is this just all going to be pro-vaccine? And I think the reality is people who spend a lot of time studying these subjects are pretty pro-vaccine, and I think that's where the science is going. I mean, this panel is no fluke. These people have actually done work. These people have done a lot of work and science behind it, and sort of get there. So, I mean, if you're disappointed in that, I apologize. I think you can go to plenty of places on the internet to find a lot of crazy stuff on the internet to tell you that you don't need the vaccine, it's not safe for you. But, around here, when you talk to these people, they're going to tell you it's safe. They're going to tell you that they believe in it, and they believe it for themselves and their families. Let's move on from that. And I want to talk about this concept of herd immunity. And I think there's this idea that we've sort of moved on from the importance of herd immunity, because I think there's this idea that to reach herd immunity, we're going to have to be at a pretty high level. Dr. Miller, do you think that we're at a point where we should stop concentrating so much on herd immunity and sort of focus on other metrics, or is that even a goal that's achievable?
Well, I'm not sure that as scientists we've been concentrating on it. I think we've been concentrating on trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. I think the media loves to talk about herd immunity. It is something out there that is in the news and things that you read. And certainly herd immunity is great. If we could get there and we could actually vaccinate enough people to prevent propagated spread, so to prevent that vaccine from bumping into somebody that it could infect. If we could get there, that's great. But I think what we're focused on is getting every single person vaccinated that we can get vaccinated. That's the work. And if we can get up into 70 or 80%, that's great. We'll need vaccine approved for children, I think, to get there. But I think it's a great goal.
Do we think? Well, let's shift topics a little bit. There's an issue when people. We always knew that you give mass vaccinations to millions of people, that some people are going to die from a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with the vaccine after they get the vaccine. Do we have an idea of if the vaccine has caused, and this is open to anybody, and if the vaccine has led to any death?
So I'll start on something, others can jump in. For the mRNA vaccines, death is not an endpoint that has been identified. That is not a possible endpoint that has been identified. People who have been vaccinated have died. But in the same way that if you were going to get into a car accident going to the library, it certainly isn't the library's fault. You would not then conclude that people driving to libraries get into car accidents. These are maybe there's a coincidence of these things, but there is not any direct relationship, causal. Particularly, there's no correlation, and particularly there's no causality. So this is one of those things that I think a lot of people that aren't in science don't necessarily follow as closely. And that it's really important to note that that's actually one of the things that all of the safety measures are meant to try and do. There's a reporting system that if someone has had if anyone who's been vaccinated has had any adverse event at all, that can get reported, and they do get reported. And then those reports are assessed and determine whether or not, okay, does it make sense that this might have some relationship to that vaccine? And then those are sent on and analyzed further if for some reason they think there might be. And there have been no deaths associated directly believed to be causally related to the mRNA vaccines. The J&J vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine do have a very, very rare occurrence of this blood clotting disorder. It's an extremely unusual type of blood clotting. It's normally only associated with something, a blood thinner that some people get when they go to the hospital. And so in around somewhere in a few per million so far is what the rates of this are. Have there been some blood clots? And initially they didn't really understand how they were being caused. And so unfortunately they would give heparin because that's the standard way of thinning people's blood when they're starting to get blood clots. And unfortunately that was the wrong thing to give because it turns out that's actually one of the things that's driving the problem. So once that's been figured out, they're now moving forward with a really good course of action to try and correct that when it comes to J&J and AstraZeneca. So that I think has been absolutely confirmed to be associated with that particular platform of vaccine. That's an extremely unusual and rare thing. I can't think of another vaccine for which that association has been made with any other life-threatening complication. So that's a very recent development and a new thing. But it's absolutely not associated, and it's been confirmed now that we've had so many tens and hundreds of millions of people vaccinated with the RNA vaccines. We can very strongly confirm that there's no association in that sense.
Is this probably a good time for us to sort of familiarize ourselves with the VAERS database? I think there's been a lot of people going on the internet and looking into the VAERS database, and with sort of that, oh, there's thousands of deaths that are reported because of vaccine usage. That's not a great use of the VAERS databases.
No, Dr. Miller can probably address that.
Sure. No, that's not a great use of the database. And I think it's great that there's a lot of transparency around COVID and around vaccines, but it can also lead to some of these errors in interpretation that we've seen. So yes, this is a available database, but it by no means can be used to link cause and effect. Anybody can report anything. So until it's investigated further and until it's compared to a group that hasn't received the vaccine, there is no conclusion that can be made. I do want to mention how some of these things are investigated though, and that's Vaccine Data Safety Link. And there are multiple centers around the country, I think 9 centers, and we actually have one here. So we have our Kaiser Research Center and Denver Health work together to research some of these questions, and they do it by looking at electronic medical records and comparing people who got the vaccine against people who did not. So that is a way where you could really make some sort of estimate about whether there truly is a risk.
Here's a reminder to the panel as well. In the question and answer section of the Zoom call, there's a number of people that are asking questions, and feel free to answer some of those questions that are coming along. You can type some of those questions. I know that I love the fact that we're getting a lot of questions. I'm going to try not to disappoint too many people because I'm trying to get through as many questions as I can. Here's a question that says, I'm vaccinated, and I'm going to throw this out to the panel. I'm vaccinated, have been for 6 weeks. The efficacy of the vaccine is 95%. We talked a lot about this. Does this mean I have a 5% chance of still getting COVID-19? One question. And 2, given that indoor risks are greater, should I continue to mask indoor even when restrictions are lifted?
I can start with this, and then maybe some of my other panelists can jump in also. So it is true that when you're vaccinated, you have about a 90%, 95% chance in which you're protected and wouldn't be able to get the COVID-19 infection. But there is still a chance, like he alluded to, about 5% or so, where you can still get the infection and possibly spread it to other people. So when you are indoors, the qualifier becomes, who are you with indoors? If you're with someone who is equally fully vaccinated, according to the current CDC guidelines, you can be indoors with someone who is fully vaccinated without a mask. On the other hand, if you went to a restaurant or a store where most people aren't vaccinated, it is important, and according to our current guidelines, to continue to wear a mask. So this applies to the grocery stores and all other places in which you're in an indoor facility with people who are not vaccinated.
At the same time, I was so joyous to be able to meet with my friends who were vaccinated without masks. We met as a book club a little while ago, and all of us were fully vaccinated, and we didn't wear our masks, and it just felt wonderful to me to be able to do that safely. And I've been very careful throughout the whole pandemic. I had a baby right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I didn't even accept help from people in my normal community because I was scared that my baby might be infected at that point. We didn't know. So I have been very, very careful and cautious. But after I was fully vaccinated and my friends were fully vaccinated, we got together, and I got together with people in my lab and had lunch because we're all fully vaccinated. And that is safe. So we do need to allow ourselves to experience that community and the joy that we can feel when we are vaccinated and protected from the virus.
It's a really good point, because I think, I actually, I won't, my mother would throw me away if I said her age on a webcast. So I won't say that. I love my mother. She's awesome. But I have not been able to see her for quite some time indoors. We've had a lot of meetings outside, and so we've been able. And this weekend I took her. I asked her, "What's the one thing you want to do when I'm fully vaccinated?" And she says, "I want to go to Blackhawk." So we went to Blackhawk, and we're both. It was great to be with her in the car, and not have to worry. But I do wonder if I'm vaccinated, she's vaccinated. Why do I have to continue to wear a mask inside? If this idea that 95% effective, and so I know there's going to be people that are going to be wearing masks indoors for quite some time, and that's an individual choice. It's fine. What's the idea behind? We're getting rid of masks, generally speaking, outdoors, except in large settings with lots of people. But indoors, it's gonna, people are going to walk into businesses more, I think, without wearing masks and say making people mad. So why do I need to continue? Is there a good reason why, if I've been vaccinated, why I need to continue to wear a mask inside?
Social normalcy. It's really difficult to do something if a lot of people aren't vaccinated yet. And so I will wear a mask as long as I need to allow other people to wear masks and feel normal. So for me, that's the reason I wear a mask in public. It's because I want other people to feel like they're normal wearing a mask. And if they don't feel comfortable getting vaccinated yet, and they're not getting vaccinated, I need them to continue to wear the mask so that my children don't get infected, because they can't get vaccinated yet.
And I actually think, Emily, that's a really important point that I think to me at any rate, got a little muddled from the messages coming for why we're still wearing masks. I think what Emily just said, that's absolutely why. There's sort of a solidarity that we come with for each other until we get the vaccine rate high enough so that it's safe to move about. When these vaccines when the efficacy first came out, I think what should have been said was, hey, guess what? This is awesome. These vaccines are brilliantly good. They're really good at protecting you from getting sick. And one of the things we know about vaccines that are this good is not only do they keep you from getting sick, but everyone in history that's been this good always stops transmission. Now, we're still working that out. We haven't fully proven that yet, but that's what's coming down the pike. And so for the time being, keep your mask on because only so many people can get vaccinated. We're just going to kind of all be in this together until we get that rate up high enough. But, you should know what's coming down the road is not only we guess that the vaccine not only keeps you safe, but it actually helps you keep other people safe. Unfortunately, that wasn't what was said. What was said was, hey, guess what? These vaccines will protect you. Great. But you might still carry it to somebody else. You could be dangerous. You might kill grandma, right? And that's actually, and so because of that, keep a mask on and stay away from everybody. And unfortunately, there's going to have to be a lot of backpedaling on that because at the moment, what we're seeing is exactly what I just said. All the data that's coming through is that the vaccines really do suppress transmission incredibly well. We knew that to be true for flu vaccines, that were only 30 or 40% effective. They cut back on disease considerably and they stop transmission to a decent degree. And that's, of course, why we recommend people getting them. So in this particular case, it was, even though it wasn't proven right out of the gate, it was a known entity in vaccinology broadly. You can't get a vaccine this successful in efficacy and not have it crush transmission through the floor. So we're seeing that now, and that's really good news because what that means is, and I hope this is incentivizing for people because I think it has been de-incentivizing to think, well, what's the point? If I'm still dangerous to somebody, I don't think I'm going to get very sick with it. So why should I bother getting the vaccine? The reason you get the vaccine is because not only does it make you safe for you, but it actually makes you safe to be around other people. And the reality is it's even safe to be around other people who are unvaccinated. And of course, we're going to have to deal with that. At some point, that's going to have to be true because we're not going to be able to vaccinate. And not everyone is going to take that vaccine. So I think that I hope that's incentivizing for people, knowing that you protect yourself and you protect your neighbor when you get that vaccine.
There was another question in the Q&A that kind of tags on that, and that is, it's true that the clinical trials did not test infection, they tested symptoms. But since that time, the New England Journal of Medicine has published 2 different articles out of 3 different university hospitals who've shown that these vaccines do prevent infection. So 90% reduction in infection. And that was done by PCR tests. So they do reduce infection, and that has been proven. There's good data on that, but it wasn't part of the clinical trials. It was done in hospital staffs at UCLA, UCSD, and Southwestern in Texas.
Yeah, and there's about 9 different studies from around the world on the 3 different vaccines showing exactly what Dr. Bates just said, that both it reduces asymptomatic infection as well as symptomatic infection. So the data are now very robustly in. These things block transmission. And that's really, really good news because that actually is our way out of this whole thing.
Dr. Bates, I'm going to bring you back in. And I apologize for this. This is what happens when you get a lot of questions from a lot of people. We're going to hopscotch from some subjects, but I think that's okay because there's a lot of topics to cover. We talk a lot about Pfizer being in the younger group, now being approved for 12 to 15-year-old. Does that mean that Pfizer is the vaccine for kids to get moving forward? Do we expect Moderna to be approved? And is when my daughter, who's 11, is eligible, is she going to automatically get the Pfizer, or are there going to be alternatives?
So the Moderna vaccine clinical trials for younger children are already ongoing. And the Pfizer vaccine is undergoing clinical trials for younger age groups as well. So my children are also in that group that don't have access to vaccines yet. And so, I'm hoping that those data come out and are submitted for FDA approval or release soon, but it's likely to be around September, I think. But they are already ongoing, enrolling people, younger kids, young kids, even 6 months old should be getting those vaccines as part of the clinical trials next week. But even, so 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds are already enrolled for both Moderna and Pfizer vaccines.
And Novavax is currently enrolling as well.
I'm still marvel at this idea that here we are in May, and here we are with a viable vaccine, not just one viable vaccine, but a series of viable vaccines. It's just this sort of like, I think when we look back in time, we're just going to sort of like say, wow, this was a remarkable development in sort of in human activity. Question about the J&J vaccine. Yeah, go ahead.
One more point there. This kind of goes back to what you were asking before of us all being pro-vaccine. I want to make a point that for people who aren't surrounded by scientists and doctors, it's really easy to think that we're equally distributed between pro-vaccine and not pro-vaccine. But I don't know anyone that I work with, medical students, graduate students, doctors that I work with that are on my floor that I run into that is hesitant to get these vaccines. I have seen on the internet the people that are against them, but I don't personally know anyone. All of us were super excited to get vaccinated as soon as possible. And we have looked at the data and we're excited about it. So I think that that's something to make known.
Yeah, it's a little bit like gathering a bunch of roofers together and asking, where's the anti-shingle group in all of the roofing people out there? Who's for tar paper over shingles? You're going to have a hard time tracking that down. And the people who are the most trained and spend their entire lives thinking about that and studying it, they're going to be pretty much for the shingle, right? And I think that seems to me a decent metaphor for why you broadly get scientists who think and do this sort of thing and evaluate this kind of data critically. It's not that the data is not critically evaluated. It is. We're incredibly critical people. We're all born skeptics. So there's no lack of critique going on here, but it is true that the preponderance of data continues to win out in favor of the vaccine.
Let's continue to use the house metaphor and the roof metaphor and throw this over to Dr. Miller. It's one question to sort of say, we're all in agreement that you should get the shingles on your roof. That's a good idea. It's another thing for the government to say, you got to have shingles on your roof. And there's a lot of discussion about mandates and this idea that we're going to force people. Where do you fall on that idea of what the proper role? Look, Ohio today, the governor of Ohio just in the last couple of hours announced a lottery for people to make basically $1 million off of if they're vaccinated. Crazy story that just developed in the last couple of hours. It's an interesting story. Where do you find the role of government in terms of moving from encouraging to sort of saying, you got to do this? Because there's a huge difference there.
Right. So I think you certainly start with encouragement and even incentives and enticement, if that works. There's been lots of creative ideas about how to get people vaccinated. So that's been shown that can be effective. So I'm all for trying all those things and doing all the things that we still haven't exhausted yet to get people vaccinated. Like I mentioned, we need to make sure we have great access and we need to make sure that we've answered all the questions that people have. But in some situations, like my university, our university has decided that it's going to be required. Students, staff, faculty who come back to the University of Colorado or CSU, they're going to be required to be vaccinated because the administration has determined that to keep faculty and students safe and to be able to go back to what we do and do well, we need to be protected and we need to have confidence that we are all protected. So there have been people already who have stepped out, and a lot of universities have stepped out and said, we are going to make it a requirement. It's been a tool that's been around for decades and has been used very effectively in schools to keep our children safe in schools. So it's certainly a tool in the toolbox. I understand that there are strong feelings on many sides of this issue, and it should be something we talk about and we debate. But I think it's a tool that in certain circumstances helps make us safe, whether that's work or school or other settings.
Does ask the panel, does anybody on the panel believe in that the government should be mandating this?
I can jump in. I think that tool, like Dr. Miller said, needs to be available to public health experts if needed. And so I think, and institutions if needed to protect their people. I think the overall and overarching goal when deciding to institute a mandate is to try and save lives. And if that becomes a necessity, yes, then I think that tool should be available. Obviously, there's a lot of other tools like incentives and mask wearing and social distance and maybe even stay-at-home orders and therapeutics that can help control death in this pandemic. But I believe that we should definitely keep that tool available in case we do need it.
I'm curious. That's an interesting thought. Go ahead, Bates. Dr. Bates.
At the same time, I think it is important that people feel that they can make the choice. And one thing that our university is starting with is by saying, if you are fully vaccinated, you are allowed to take off your mask. You are allowed to stand next to each other to explain a concept, which is incredibly important for us as scientists. I need to show people physically how to do things in my lab. And when we haven't been able to do that over the last year, it's been really detrimental to research. And so there is an incentive, and that is that we can drop our masks if we're vaccinated. And those who aren't vaccinated have to keep wearing their mask, have to stay 6 feet apart from people. And that's important too, so that someone who is immunocompromised but has been vaccinated, but still it's their immune system that does the work. So they're not as protected, right? Even by that vaccine. And so it's important that people who aren't vaccinated stay well away, stay away from those people that are still vulnerable.
There's this idea that when somebody, lots of people have gotten the virus. Everyone generally knows somebody who may have gotten the virus. And there's this thought, well, I got the virus. I don't need to get vaccinated now. What would you say if I came up to you, Dr. Kettle, right now and said, you know what, Dr. Kettle, I tested positive, I got sick, I have antibodies in my system, I'm good. What do you say?
Yeah, and if we didn't have any variants, I'd say, yeah, you're fine. Honestly, the data show that 80%, having had COVID is about 80% protective against any future disease. It's almost as good as the vaccines. Noteworthy, the vaccines are better. So that's something. So if there was no such thing as variants circulating around, I would say, yeah, you're more than fine. But it turns out viruses mutate, right? This is the way it goes. We're really lucky that actually in some ways that this is a coronavirus and not something like an influenza, because its mutation rate is considerably slower. Built into the virus is sort of an internal fact-checking program that a lot of RNA viruses don't have. And so we're sort of lucky in that sense that it doesn't mutate quite as quickly. But it still does. And as we're seeing, so many of the variants that are spinning around out there are absolutely taking over, and they're going to become the dominant strains that are circulating in the public. It's just sort of a natural thing that happens post-pandemic. So if you've had COVID, then it's already known that your level of immunity, your risk at getting reinfected in some way is definitely higher if you haven't had the vaccine. Now, we've done some really actually recent studies to show that anybody that has had, and these have been published, anybody that has had COVID and then gets a single shot of one of the vaccines, their immunity is usually higher than anybody that got 2 shots of the vaccine. So it pretty much takes one more shot on goal. And not only is your immunity higher, but actually your immunity against those variants, that's the thing that's really jumped up. So it's really fortunate. And again, what's interesting is that that's the vaccine against the original strain, and yet it's really driving a good response against those variants. So the reason I would give somebody is really because there's a pool of variants out there, and you'd rather be as protected against those as you possibly can be.
Oh, we talk a lot about the variants are one of those words that us in the television news business love to sort of throw around and sort of scary, like variants are going to come and they're going to spell doom for everybody. They're obviously a concern, and they should absolutely be a concern. And when there was just announced just last week that B1617.2 is a variant that was found in Mesa County. And that is the variant that was first identified in India. And so that raises, from a non-scientific standpoint, that seems concerning. Should we be concerned about what's happening with all these mutations that are taking place around the world?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer, so we're lucky again, the analysis of the vaccines is that the immunity generated from them still seems to be protecting very well against any of these variants. To me, the part that's concerning, and what the variants that are rising and developing around the world tells me, is that a vaccine program in America is not the answer, the sole answer to this problem, right? This is a global problem, and the more it spins around the globe, the bigger this variant, these new variants have the potential to be a bigger problem. And so what it does is it reminds us all that actually this is the way viruses work. They any place they get a chance to infect, they mutate and they find a new way of coming up with a new version of themselves. So I'm grateful. I don't think there shouldn't be a whole lot of fear and anxiety about whether or not the current vaccines are protecting well against those. That should be a reason, an incentive to go get the vaccine, because yes, it seems to be, will be also protected against whatever variants are currently there. But it should be a warning to all of us that it's really important to move these vaccines into the rest of the globe as quickly as they have moved into America.
Dr. Hazel, I see you shaking your head at a lot of these things, and I want to ask a sort of an add-on to that. Do we have there's been an interesting ethical debate in the United States about, do we have an obligation as a country where we're getting lots of vaccine in short period of time? We're now vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds that technically are not that vulnerable to the virus at a time when other countries are not having effective vaccination programs. Just talk a little bit about that. Do you have a concern about that? And is there an ethical obligation as Americans to be better stewards of the vaccine and in terms of a global community?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think there is an ethical obligation as humans, yeah, not as Americans, not as Ethiopians or Ghanaians or whatever country, but as humans, to make sure that all humans around the world are able to get access to the vaccine so we can beat back this virus that is affecting all humans around the world. So I think that's where the ethical consideration comes into play. And then going back to Dr. Kettle's point about vaccines and the ability to help beat back variants. I mean, we look at India, for example. As of December, there were studies in India that were showing about 50% of people had been exposed to the virus, hence maybe had natural immunity. And despite that, by March, we are seeing the country literally get their health system shut down because of increased rates of COVID, and most likely and most certainly due to variants that are circulating. So it just brings to the point that natural immunity alone is not good enough to protect against variants. And the India example is it's really your exhibit A for that, and that vaccines are going to be the solution. And so being able to get these vaccines out to developing countries, especially, and low-income, middle-income countries are extremely important. And as vaccines supply increase in the Western world, I think it would be a good idea to really find a way to distribute that around the world.
I want to ask one quick question, and it's sort of a thought of all four. There's been lots of talks about the need for a booster, and I think maybe I've sort of assumed that maybe there's going to come a time when we're going to need boosters. We're going to need an extra vaccine. Is that would you say it's likely? It's not likely? That you think it's going to happen, or you don't think it's going to happen?
I think it will happen because, and I'll be glad to get it when it comes around. I like I said, I've been immune longer than, at least vaccine related immune, longer than most people. And I see these, variants spinning themselves out, and I'm encouraged by the duration of my immune memory, but I'll be happy to get a little bit better variant immunity. There's really no difference in this in the long against the flu. My personal opinion is, and honestly, we're learning this as we go. There's no real great crystal ball for this. My personal opinion is that over the first couple of years here, we'll get the globe immunized and then maybe boosted against with a vaccine that kicks up immunity against the variants. And then we'll see how well that controls just sort of the amount of circulating virus and what pockets it circulates in and what kind of variants spin out. And then maybe every 2 to 5 years after that, we get different boosters. I think that's my personal opinion. But so in that sense, boosters, I think, are part of our future. But I don't think on the same schedule as the flu vaccine.
And I think it's important to note that a lot of these questions depend on how many people get vaccinated and how quickly. So if all of us got vaccinated right now, if we could do that, new variants wouldn't arise. If we could all in the whole world get vaccinated right now, we would stop coronavirus, we would stop the pandemic. That isn't the case. It takes a long time to get everyone vaccinated, and some populations don't even have access to the vaccine at all. And so because those variants are starting to crop up or pop up, that we may have to get a booster, but that is dependent on each of our actions. If everyone who has access to the vaccines gets vaccinated, we prevent those variants from starting.
And I think that's such an important subject to bring up. I want to leave everyone the opportunity to sort of have your closing thoughts, and I would urge all of you. And I know I know you'll already do this, but so I'll say this to prep the audience. Like, let's talk let's talk more elevator pitches. Let's talk about what you tell people if they ask. I mean, there's a lot of people with very sincere questions, and so as I give each of you a closing thought, let's talk a little bit about how you would approach just somebody who comes up to you on the street and says, "Hey, I got some questions about this." So whoever wants to start first, or actually, I'll start with Dr. Hazel, and then I'll move on from there. So, Dr. Hazel, if you want to start, go ahead.
Thanks. That's a good question. So finally, I want to say, if someone did come up to me, again, I always go through this process. I listen to them. I listen to their concerns. I understand why they have concerns. I try to address those concerns by providing the most accurate information out there and being a knowledge broker, knowing that I have access to training and knowledge, and being able to disseminate that knowledge in a way that a lot of people can understand and use to make decisions that are going to be best for themselves. So that's what I do whenever I'm approached. There are different reasons for vaccine hesitancy around, and more specifically in the communities of color, there's a lot of historic and current issues, especially with systematic racism, that have perpetuated vaccine hesitancy. And so when discussing these topics with people from BIPOC communities, you have to be able to address that, to acknowledge that, then provide the correct information that helps them make the decision. Some of the information I provide is regards to the testing of the vaccines, letting them know that it was tested on people of color, Black, Latinx, all of these people were represented in the testing groups. And also scientists from BIPOC backgrounds were involved in developing these vaccines. So that sometimes provides a sense of assurance when dealing with the vaccine. Though the virus has affected all communities of color harder than most communities around the country, it's good to know that the reason for this is because of all these historic issues, and that these problems aren't going to disappear after the virus or the pandemic is gone, and that we have to continue all the work we are doing right now, and the sense of urgency we have around vaccine equity and health equity, even beyond COVID. So thanks for the opportunity again, and giving your platform to be able to educate the public and answer questions.
Thanks, Dr. Hazel. I'll move on to Dr. Kettle.
So there are two things I always tell people. One, when they have concerns, because people are, it's not unreasonable. Any medical treatment comes with concerns, and that's legit. It's helpful. It has been helpful for me to say, I was willing to jump in at this before it was even approved by anything. my confidence in this and its process and its history and its development of immunology and vaccinology, which is really about a couple hundred years old, along with sort of the recent developments, gave me the confidence to step in at the clinical trial level. And be part of that process. And so hopefully that's comforting to people that, that kind of, with my background, that trust in the process that produces these. I hope that's comforting. Second of all, the thing that I always mention is that a lot of people think, well, let's just get to herd immunity naturally. But if we just let it run, so that was some of the early ideas in the pandemic. Let's just let the infection run rampant and we'll all become immune. And there has never been an infectious disease in the history of humanity for which broad scale immunity has been developed that way. Smallpox was a scourge on the planet for thousands of years, and it was only eradicated and really only controlled and then eradicated as a result of a public vaccine effort, a global vaccine effort. And it's one of the greatest successes of medical practice. So really the only way out of this, the only way to actually do any significant control on this is through this vaccine process. And so whatever we can do to get people comfortable with that is really, really important, because it really is the only way to the backside of a pandemic.
Dr. Kettle. Dr. Miller, I'll move it on to you.
Thank you. Like my colleagues, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to talk about these vaccines that I think it's pretty clear we're all pretty passionate about. I agree with Dr. Hazel. You really have to hear the question and try and listen first and not talk. I think that's key. And I would also ask the person, who do you trust? Where would you like to get this information from? Is that do you have a provider that you trust? Is it a religious leader? Is it, a neighbor, so that they can go to someone that they trust? And I have to say, I look at the numbers. I'm an epidemiologist. So to me, when I look at how effective, we've already shown this vaccine to be in Colorado by looking at the drop in hospitalizations and deaths among our older population. That is such proof. It's right there. We can see that. We can see those numbers drop in that older population. Right now in our hospitals, most people are less than 60 years old. It's not the older folks anymore that are getting sick or dying from this to the degree that it once was. And I think it would be such a shame if, we've protected this older population and we leave our younger population at risk when we have the opportunity to save lives, prevent severe illness, and every day that goes by that we don't get people vaccinated, we are going to see more people get sick. So we still have disease out there. I don't want people to forget that. We still have a problem, and there's still quite a bit of disease that's circulating. So this is urgent.
And Dr. Bates, why don't you bring us on home?
Well, what I would say is, we all hate coronavirus. That's our common enemy. We are on the same team as humans. We want to be done with this pandemic. We want to lose the masks. And each of us can make a difference in whether or not that happens, whether we end the pandemic. Each of us, each person who has access to the vaccines can make a difference in whether we end this pandemic. If enough people in our church congregations, schools, work are vaccinated, then we can be comfortable bringing our kids places when our kids can't yet get vaccinated. And the vaccination really does just use our own immune systems to destroy the virus. It's a wonderful thing that we can get together with friends and eat together and really celebrate being safe once we're vaccinated and know that we're not going to hurt anyone with that. So I really think we're on our way, and I hope everyone will get their questions answered by someone that they trust. And that's what I've got to say.
I can't thank each one of you enough for talking about this. I think what's also clear is that I think we could go on for another 10 hours and not answer all of the questions that are out there. And I'm actually in my head. I'm already circulating this idea. We gotta figure another opportunity where we can have more discussion. Work with Gazette, work with 9 News, and figure this out, because it's just, these are really, really valuable conversations to have. And I sort of envision a time, because I know logistically we're all in separate places. We're all used to Zoom, but I know there's like all of us would love to be in the same room. We all feel safe being in the same room and having this discussion one-on-one, because we've all been vaccinated. So I just want to thank everyone on the panel for really a really thoughtful discussion. Hopefully some people at home got some ideas they can talk about themselves or think in their head. And other than that, Vince, I'm going to throw it back to you, and just thanks for hosting this, and thanks for giving us the time to talk about it.
Chris, thanks so much for asking the questions, and for such a thoughtful discussion. You said, Dr. Bates, Dr. Kettle, Dr. Hazel, Dr. Miller. Thank you so much for helping provide some clarity in what we all hope are the final stages of this thing. You know, our lives depend on good information right now. I think you just gave us the gift of the best knowledge that currently exists in our state. So thank you for that. I wanted to mention that video from this conversation will be available soon on the Denver Gazette website, app, and in their digital newspaper, and also on the 9 News website and 9 News YouTube channel, and then the 9 News app. And thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate all the good questions and the great conversation. Thank you all. And we are done.
So can people still see us?